أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما. So Assalamu alaikum everyone. The verse that we have chosen to reflect on today is from Sura Israa, which is chapter 17 of the Quran, and this is verse 26. The part that we are going to be talking about, the translation of which is, and do not squander wastefully. Now, before we get to examining the implications of this, let's just give a little bit of context to the whole verse, which is, and give to the near of kin his due, and to the needy and the wayfarer, and do not squander wastefully. And the following ayat goes on to say, which is ayat 27, surely the squanderers are the fellows of the shaitans, and the shaitan is ever ungrateful to his Lord. Now, very interestingly, we know that the Quran discourages wastefulness, extravagance in many different forms. And before we discuss the meaning of extravagance or what it is, let's just talk about the fact that in this particular verse, the extravagance that is being talked about is the extravagance in giving. It's the extravagance in charity, for example. And it's a bit interesting, right, that we are asked to be not even to squander when we are giving charity. In other words, to be mindful. And scholars explain that what this means is that, we cannot be so generous that we, in all things, we have to keep the rights of everyone in mind. And even when we are giving charity, we have to keep the rights of our immediate family, make sure that they are provided for before we give to others. That is one of the meanings. And in other places of the Quran, Allah is recommending that do not be so stingy that you don't give anything, and do not be so extravagant that you give away everything, right? So that is in the context of this verse. But let's use this verse to talk about extravagance, on a larger scale. Extravagance and being mindful in our spending is all about balance. And we know that Islam encourages us to be balanced in all aspects of our life, including how we spend money and resources. And as in this verse, even when we are giving charity. So while it is encouraged for us to use and enjoy the bounties and blessings that we have been given, this needs to be done mindfully and with the concern for the rights of everyone involved, our immediate family, the welfare of society that uses the same resources on this planet and which bears the brunt of our overspending and our overconsumption. Now, interestingly, there is not a set amount or a clear boundary that distinguishes extravagance from normal spending. So the injunction not to be extravagant or wasteful does not relate to the quantity of spending, but rather to the idea of wastefulness. And scholars explain that since all of us have been blessed with differing amounts of resources, what is extravagance for one person may not count as extravagance for another. And again, talking about charity, when our basic needs, the needs of our families have been provided for, then if we, quote unquote, are too generous, that it may not count as extravagance as long as our families have been provided for. And so, in other words, what might be moderate spending for one with who has the means may well be extravagant for another who spends more than they can afford, or who has to borrow to fulfill their own greed or to keep up appearances. Now, this is a really important concept for us to be mindful of. In modern society, as a generation of humans, we have more material resources available to us than ever before. And at the same time, we also see a greater economic divide than ever before. While one area of the world is starving, other parts of the world squander resources by throwing away more food than can feed all of those in need in another part of the world. In the affluent regions of the North and the West, for example, we find ourselves ensnared in a culture of extravagance and excess, a realm where materialism reigns supreme. fostering an insatiable appetite for relentless consumption. Here, the mantra of out with the old, in with the new, we know it resonates for all of us louder than ever, and perpetuating a cycle of disposal and acquisition and disposal, driven not by necessity, but by the mere arrival of a fresher model. How many of us, we are perfectly happy with our gadgets, with what we have, until the next new model comes and we become, slaves of the marketing world, when suddenly what seems completely unnecessary, we want it simply for the reason that it is there and is brighter and shinier than ever before. And in this frenzied landscape, I believe, technology and fashion, we know, morph at a breakneck speed, compelling us to embark on a ceaseless quest to stay abreast of the latest trends and gadgets. And our economies, the marketing world is crafted upon the premise that individuals will continue to engage in purchases far surpassing their genuine needs, often stretching their financial means to a breaking point. And we know that beneath this glossy veneer, this what we call retail therapy, lies a very poignant truth, that our innate desires cannot be satiated by material possessions alone. We are led to believe that fulfillment awaits at the end of a shopping spree, only to discover that the void we seek to fill remains untouched by the accumulation of goods. Very importantly, this wanton consumption is happening at a very big price. The price for ourselves, of course, the detachment from spirituality, the immersion in materialism is one aspect. The planet itself is groaning and dying because of the excess of consumption of its inhabitants. So much so that today we know there are not enough people on the planet to simply take the excess of clothes that we buy and then disregard due to disposable fashion. The crisis of the thousands of tons of perfectly wearable clothes ending up in the landfills is only one example of the result of excess consumption and squandering of resources. And like I said, the price to ourselves of this hedonic treadmill and materialistic lifestyle cannot be underestimated. We need to ask ourselves how much time and effort we are spending simply to acquire more things, and at least in my experience, how much time and energy it takes to look after all of these things that we acquire on a daily basis. Practicing mindful consumption will look different for all of us. What is important is that we are conscious of what we are spending and why. We also need to consider the impact that our consumption has on our spirituality and the health of the planet. What can we reduce and reuse, not recycle? Remember, recycling is a big myth that it helps. What can we do without? Can we take that extra step in composting? Are we squandering resources like water and electricity without even thinking about it? Let us consider two prophetic narrations in this regard. So once Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam asked that ripe dates be brought to the people around him. When the companions started eating the dates, some threw the date seeds away. The Imam told them, do not do this, as it is from the tadheer that God does not like corruption. What scholars explain that it might mean is that the date seeds could be used for animal feed or for human benefit and should not just be discarded. And those of us who are mindful of composting in this regard, this is something that I know I could do a lot better with, right? And there's another narration. The Holy Prophet ﷺ was once walking along and saw his companion doing wudu, making the ablution for prayer. And the man was using a lot of water. Why are you wasting, O Saad? He asked. The man was surprised. Is there a waste of water even in wudu? He asked. Yes, said the Prophet, even if you are beside a running stream. Again, those of us who live in the West, who live in the North, we don't even think about these things. When we go to developing countries and we realize how scarce resources like electricity and water and gas even are, that we become more mindful. However, those of us who live in the West, like the Prophet ﷺ said, even if you're beside a flowing stream, do not waste water. So turning off water in between the actions of wudu, it takes a little bit of mindfulness to get into the habit, but it is, it becomes second nature once we do it often enough. Switching off lights when we're not in a room, even in public places and hotel rooms. So even when we are not paying for the electricity bill. And going that extra mile in reusing and composting parts of fruits and veggies that we do not consume. There is another podcast episode that I had done a while ago, which I will link to in this episode, which is called 5 Steps to Overcoming Materialism. And you might find that useful as well. So inshallah, I will see you in the next episode. Assalamu alaikum.